Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today what I want to talk about is the Apple Watch Series 7. The Series 7 coming from the Series 6. So the Apple Watch Series 6 was my first Apple Watch. I've not had any of the previous ones. The main reason I got that one was because of my work scenario. The setup that I'm in at the moment means that it was actually quite useful for me. However, there was a few things that kind of still bugged me about it, mainly just the way that you reply back to people with messages and things like that. Dictation worked quite well for the most part, but there's always those scenarios where you don't want to be talking, or you can't be talking to reply back to a message, and obviously typing out the letters in order to reply back is it was pretty bad. Yes, you could save a lot of sort of default responses, replies, but they're not always suitable. One of the main things that attracted me to the Series 7 was the full keyboard, and whilst it's not perfect, it is workable. You can make do with it, so you can do it either way. You can either use swipe selection in order to type out your words, or you can just type out the actual letters itself, and either one, I've tried both, and both of them seem to work quite well. The one thing that seems to trip me up more so than anything else, autocorrect, where often it will change sentences on the watch that it doesn't seem to do on the phone. So I'll write out similar messages on each, and for some reason it will choose the wrong word on the watch, which makes your replies look kind of weird. But yeah, the keyboard was a nice sort of addition to the Series 7 with the bigger screen. Now, coming on to the bigger screen, that is something that in the pictures and in the videos, it just doesn't sort of come across just how much bigger it is. And I think the one clever thing that Apple have done with the Series 7 is no matter which sort of face, Apple Watch face that you actually have enabled, what they've done is they've sort of pushed the data. So this is like an existing one that I used to use with my previous setup. So it's I believe this is the modular face. So I've got my clock and my time in the top right. I've got the battery percentage. I've then got one of my prayer widgets. Bottom left is my HomeKit widget. Center bottom is another prayer widget, which I'll explain why I have two in another video. And then bottom right I have outside temperature, just so that I can keep an eye on the weather when I'm actually indoors, because where I work the temperature is way hotter than where it's actually outdoors, hence why it's good to always know what the temperature is outdoors, because that way I know whether I need a coat or not when I'm actually starting or finishing work. But with this particular watch face, what I noticed was everything's been pushed right out to the borders, which means that you can actually reduce the size of the text. I think on my Series 6 I had it basically just as normal, so I had it bang smack in the middle wherever it comes, and on this I've been able to reduce it all the way down, and then I took it back one notch, just so then when I'm reading messages, or mainly for like sports updates and things like that, I don't have to actually concentrate so much in order to actually read the text. It is still very clear, you can still read it, but it just I did check between the smallest size and one size bigger, and the amount of extra data that you were getting with the smallest size wasn't really worth the payoff for me, so I went back up one size, basically one notch on the sort of font size. But yeah, for me personally, I think the screen is very noticeable. This watch face in particular, obviously the sort of rolling over, and that's the other thing that I have noticed as well, where you're able to view it from much more tighter angles, if you like, where previously you would have wanted to rotate your wrist. With this particular watch, what you find is obviously with that curved glass, with it folding over into those curves, it is a little distracting, so you do get a lot of instances where the light is actually shining on all of those corners, all of those rounded corners, and it can be a little distracting. But as other reviewers have mentioned, the actual contrast ratio on this one does seem to be slightly better, so you actually, even though in theory you should be getting more glare because you're now looking at the sort of rounded edges of the glass, it is still legible. So whatever they've done, it seems to be working quite well. And if you do have one of the sort of colored background watch faces, then it probably works slightly differently to when you actually have just one of the modular watch faces, where generally you know exactly where you're looking for that information, and it's a lot easier to pick up. The extra brightness, I can't say I've really noticed it so much on this particular watch face, but I do know that there are other analog watch faces that do tend to have a much brighter display compared to the Series 6. Right, coming on to performance. Performance has been pretty much identical to the Series 6 because it is the same chip. However, what I would say is this may just be because it's a brand new watch and it's not got 1 year's worth of usage, but it just feels a tiny bit snappier in certain things that I do. So some of the prayer widgets that I actually use, or the complications, they just seem to load up and refresh a little bit quicker on this particular watch than they did on my Series 6. That could literally just be a software bug. It's no worse. Is it slightly better? It may be a placebo effect, but to me it's definitely not any worse, which is perfectly fine. Right, battery life. So I did originally post a image in the community tab back when I first got the watch, where the first day I actually got it, I went to do a software update and it just wouldn't register my wireless charger for some reason. That night, I believe it only charged up to something like 63% or something like that overnight. The following day, once it had a chance to actually install whatever it needed to install, it'd done all the sort of backups. Since then, it's been perfectly fine. So it charges to 100%. Battery wise, once again, because this is a brand new fresh battery, and I believe the sort of percentage, the milliamp hours is like 1% greater this year. So technically we have actually had a battery bump. But what I have been finding is whenever I'm at work, so I'm getting up at 4 in the morning, I'm then obviously moving around, it's tracking movement, steps, all the rest of it. Generally I'll end the day with between 30 and 40% battery remaining, and whenever on the weekends, whenever I'm just home, or if I'm off work and I'm basically being lazy, just sat about the house, those days I've finished with between 60 and 70% battery remaining. So yeah, battery life is pretty solid. If you wanted to, you could quite easily go 2 days with this, depending on your usage. So if you turned off some of the things, so I have always on display enabled. I tend to use this watch face quite a bit as well, which obviously does mean that you'll lighten up more of the screen. However, the detection for when you rotate your wrist is quite accurate now, so it does dim the screen quite quickly, and I'm sure that'll help to actually preserve the battery life. Okay, so what else is there of note? Obviously, with this being a bigger casing, it means that none of your sort of screen protectors or just body protectors, the ones that wrap around the sides in order to protect the anodized coating, none of those fit. And if you do try and apply them, you can squeeze them on. What ends up happening is your digital crown basically is touching the side of that, so you can't actually use your digital crown. We will need to wait until all of the new sort of molds and everything come out. I did have a check on Amazon to see if there's any out there. I haven't been able to find any. So far I've been using it at work for just over a week, and I don't have any scratches on the glass itself, and I can't see any on the actual casing itself. Just whilst we're talking about the casing itself, I do much prefer this blue as opposed to last year's blue. Blue was the reason I actually bought, or one of the reasons I bought the Series 6 last year. I just found that for most of the time, it just, unless you're outdoors, it just looked black. It looked too dark. You couldn't really see the color in it. Whereas with this blue, especially when the light hits it, it really pops. And I think it's just a much better color for me. Unless you're going for one of the stainless or the titanium models, which have a very different look, they have a more premium look. If you're going for the blue color, then I think this is a better blue, in my opinion anyway, than last year's was. Okay, so to summarize, in my opinion, yeah, this for me has been a good upgrade, because as I said, the keyboard alone, the bigger screen alone, those two things alone actually make it so then the upgrade is actually worth it. Initially, when I saw the keynote and all of the initial follow-ups to that, you don't really get an idea of just how much bigger the actual screen is. Obviously, I was assuming that they'd literally just stretched the screen in the existing watch, whereas this is obviously a 1mm bigger casing, which they've then stretched the screen even further on that, which actually means that it is a considerably bigger screen, relatively speaking. Obviously we are still talking about a watch here, but it is a much bigger screen in comparison to the Series 6, and especially the way that they've actually utilized the UI in order to stretch that out. So it just feels like everything's got room to breathe, and everything's a lot easier to actually read when you're using the watch with any sort of complicated watch faces as the one that I use. So all of the sort of glancing information is much easier to actually read. Anyway, that's it for this particular video. If you do have any questions on the Series 7, drop them down in the comment section below. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and also hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any future videos. And I'd also really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up. And other than that, thanks very much for watching.